Welcome to the show. We have a great show today. This is going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. We're going to try to accomplish a couple of different things kind of in one. Number one, we're going to take aesthetics or beauty and throw it out the window. This is going to be a quick and dirty project. This is not a knife that you're going to show to your friends and say, hey, look at the cool knife I made. Not a knife that you're going to try to sell on Etsy or eBay. This is a grungy, down and dirty, basic knife. The type of thing that you might make as an expedient solution to a problem in maybe some type of a disaster situation. There's been an earthquake, a volcano, a zombie breakout, whatever it might be, and you're isolated and cut off. You're all alone. You have basic tools. You have to work with what's around you, and you have to work quick. Now, as you can see, I'm using a forge that I built. But truth be told, you can get 3/8 inch rebar hot enough to work with just about any kind of a fire as long as you have a source of air to blow continuously on it. Another way to do this might be with a propane torch. The point is, with 3/8 inch rebar, it really doesn't take that much heat to get the job done. Now, I apologize. I know it looks like I cheated there, but I actually just had a situation where I thought the camera was running for about 2 minutes and it wasn't. But you can see I pretty much just hammered the rebar flat. And you can see in that next section that I'm working, it only takes about a minute and a half. Should be able to do this in 1 or 2 heats to get a reasonably decent blade hammered out. Now, there are 100 different ways I could cut this. I could have used the angle grinder, but I'm sort of trying to stay away from power tools on this job. Partly because I'm staying with the theme of just using what you can find, and maybe the power is out and you have to work without power tools entirely. A hacksaw would work really well, a set of bolt cutters. In this case, I'm using a splitting maul. It's not the best way, but as long as I'm persistent and I keep hitting it with accuracy in the same place, I should be able to drive it through. Now, you can't see it here, but I'm actually using my little 2.5 pound hammer to drive the maul through there. A better way, of course, would be to have the edge of the maul facing up and locked into place and drive the workpiece down onto the edge of the maul. But I just didn't have a convenient way to do that. Now, ordinarily, I would be treating this, first of all, I would probably be treating this with water, not with oil. And if I was going to use oil, I would normally preheat the oil. But in this case, especially with my kids kind of hanging around in the shop area, I really didn't want to run the risk of spilling some hot oil. So made sure to keep them at a safe distance, and I worked with cool oil. You'll notice I'm finishing up in some water. This really isn't a heat treat, it's just to cool the rest of the piece. Now, ordinarily at this point, I would take the knife over to my toaster oven and I would temper it. Or I might possibly find another way to do the temper. But in this case, because I'm really working as fast and hard as I can, working against the clock, I need to get this thing done in 1 hour. Maybe there's zombies outside banging on the door. And I happen to know from another experiment I did that this type of rebar will actually take a fairly soft hardening when treated with oil. That probably means that it won't be a very clean and even heat treat. But again, we're just going for something quick and dirty, something that'll get the job done, maybe get us out of a tough situation, and I can always sharpen it up again later. But just to be clear, if you have the time and you have the resources, I would recommend testing the rebar that you're using with either an oil quench or a water quench to see how it responds to either. In fact, there's some types of rebar that really won't take a hardening at all. So under ideal circumstances, you would use a better material. But this is what we have. There's been an earthquake. There's a mob of zombies out there or whatever, angry rabid wolves or something, and I just need to get something done quickly that I can use as a knife. Now, as you can see, I'm using a metal file for this. This is actually a really cheap file. It's about $3 at Harbor Freight, if I'm not mistaken. Not a great file, but again, we're working with a steel material here that's pretty soft, definitely nowhere near the Rockwell hardness of this file, and so this should do the job just fine. I guess my original plan here was just to kind of round off and shape the pommel a little bit, but I decided why not make it into kind of a little bit of a spike. Maybe something you could break a window with if you had to get out of an overturned vehicle or something. And now we'll go to work on the blade. Now, this is entirely up to you how much work you want to do or don't want to do. I'm pretty satisfied with the overall sort of grungy butter knife look. But if you wanted to, you could shape this blade however you wanted to. I thought about putting a clip point on there. I thought about a lot of things, but in the end, I just said, you know what? In the interest of time, I'm going to reshape this just enough to give it some symmetry and overall what I think is a functional blade design. I don't want it to come to too sharp of a point because I know the steel is a little soft and I don't want the point to wind up getting folded over I want enough belly in the blade that if I need to do some skinning with it or something like that, I can. But overall, I'm just going for a nice utility blade, something you might use for a lot of different tasks. Might fill the role of a pocket knife, more or less, but still with enough of a blade on it to give you a chance in a fight if you had to. Now, there isn't a whole lot to say about this process. The main thing here is just to pick an angle and go with it to the best of your ability. When you're filing that bevel in, you do not want to be changing up that angle, or you'll be chasing that edge around and you'll never get it to line up right. I will say, though, that because I'm doing this by hand and I'm not using anything as a guide, it's pretty reasonable to expect that this is going to be a little bit of a rough-shaped bevel. It's not just going to be a clean and neat plane all the way throughout. But as you'll see in a minute, that won't matter that much, because as I get right out to the sharp edge of it, I'm actually going to change the angle. And I'm doing that for a specific reason. I suck at bevels. No, that may also be true. But the specific reason I'm doing that is because I want to give this a convex edge. Does that make sense? I don't want to have a flat grind on this thing. I want to get as much meat as I can right out there behind the edge. Granted, the knife will not be as good for slicing, but with a steel that I already know is pretty soft, I'm willing to give up some slicing ability in exchange for some extra toughness right out there at the edge. I don't want that edge to get rolled over real easily. And when I've tested rebar before and hardened it in various ways, that is one of the things that I've seen. If you don't get a real good heat treat on the rebar, what you'll usually wind up with is not an edge that's going to crack or break, but you wind up with an edge that's going to roll, or in other words, bend. And it's a lot harder to fix a blade that has a bent edge, a rolled edge, let's say, than it is to fix a blade that is maybe just dull. So of course a convex edge gives you a lot of thickness in the blade right behind the sharp edge, and that seems appropriate for this particular design. Now, I called this the 1 hour knife, partly because it seemed like kind of a nice round number, but I do want to say, at this point the knife is basically done. And we've only got, I don't know, maybe 30 or 35 minutes into it. But as long as the zombies aren't actually pounding down your door, you might as well take some time to put some jimping along the back. And depending on how you want to do it, this process could actually go really quick. For example, if you did have power available, you could use a grinder and probably put these notches in about 30 seconds. But I will be using a metal file. And some of you metal file purists have undoubtedly already started to cringe watching me drag this file back and forth. This is not necessarily the best technique, but it is a technique that can work rather quickly for getting the notch started. And that's mainly what I'm doing here. I'm getting the notch started by moving it back and forth, and then once I have that groove established, then you'll see me pushing forward with a deliberate forward stroke where those teeth can really cut. But yes, you will put extra wear on a file if you do it this way. Probably not meaningfully on a steel that's this soft, but certainly on a proper knife steel that was properly hardened. You won't really be getting any cut on that backstroke. The cutting happens on the forward stroke, so you're just basically putting needless wear on your file. Now, some of you may find yourself in a situation after the apocalypse where you're completely alone and you have to totally fend for yourself. But if you can find like some apocalypse helpers, maybe some assistants, you can really save yourself a lot of work. And that'll give you time to practice up your, I don't know, zombie bashing or whatever you need to work on, while the helpers do the dirty work. Here again, you'll see that I'm getting the groove started by working the file back and forth, but once that groove is established and my son takes over, I'm doing my best to show him that you can really make more progress if you really concentrate on that forward stroke. To be honest though, he's pretty young. I think it's important to get him started in good habits early, but I'm not really sure I convinced him that it made that much of a difference to cut on the forward stroke. But hey, I was doing it wrong for decades, and if I was able to learn at my age, I'm sure he'll pick it up pretty quick at his age.
I know it feels like you're going really slow, but you're actually doing...
So there it is in all of its ugly glory. I should say, though, it may not be the most beautiful knife, but it's actually quite comfortable in the hand, and that might surprise you. But that jimping really adds a lot of security to the purchase on that knife. The handle, of course, it's a little thin, but when you can use that jimping to kind of give yourself a little bit of leverage to kind of lock it into your hand, it actually makes for a very secure grip. So again, not the most beautiful knife, not the best made, certainly not the best steel. The heat treat left a lot to be desired, but it's a knife, and it's a knife I made in less than an hour. Now, to sharpen this up, you'll see that I start by using kind of a worn-out grinding wheel. That works okay, but It's worn so much that the actual fibers that weave through there and hold it together, they actually start to come up after I work like in one area for more than a few seconds. They actually start to peel up from there. So you'll see me switch to sandpaper at a certain point too. But there's plenty of things around the shop I could have used for this, and I have sharpening stones and whatever. But the idea here was, again, to kind of put yourself in this position. There's been some type of a disaster, and you just have to work with what you have available to you. You don't necessarily get to run to the hardware store and pick up what you need. And pretty much any flat but gritty surface will remove steel. So, I mean, I could have like a cinder block sitting here and be sharpening on a cinder block. I mean, we have rocks on the property here that have a flat enough surface that, I haven't tried them. Maybe I should give it a try. And there's a lot of different ways to sharpen a knife. And again, we're not going for shaving sharp here. We're just going for something that will cut, slice, slash, whatever it's called upon to do in a rough, rugged environment, and get you out of a bad situation maybe. And then when the day is done, you can bring it back and sharpen it up again. Now, of course, I've had some fun imagining that I'm making this knife for some type of survival situation. In truth, it would be very unlikely that I'd wind up in a survival situation and not have a knife with me. So this scenario probably is not very likely to come up. But the other reason I'm doing this is that I really want to make the point, if you're thinking about getting into something like this, knife making or blacksmithing, metalwork, some type of DIY, even woodwork, whatever, just go ahead and jump in. Don't worry about your skill level. Don't worry about whether you're going to be making something beautiful. Don't even worry about whether you have the right tools. Everybody starts somewhere. I don't have anywhere near half the tools in my shop that I should have, and I certainly don't have the skills yet. But I have what I have, and I'm working with it, and I'm learning as I go, and I'm building as I go, and I'm adding tools as I go. I'm learning what works for me and what doesn't. And I just think that's the way to do it. You know, if you've got the money and the time and you can go take a class or, become an apprentice to a professional, by all means do that. But there's nothing wrong with just jumping in with what you have and learning as you go. And right now is the best time in human history to just jump in and get working, because there's so much stuff on YouTube. There's so many blogs all over the internet. I mean, you could learn to do just about anything without ever setting foot in a classroom. So for me, I guess the idea of setting this out as a challenge, like, hey, can you make a knife in 1 hour? If you're making a knife in 1 hour, the odds are pretty good it's not something you're going to be selling with pride at your Etsy store, unless you got a lot more skill than I do. But it's a way to challenge yourself and say, what can I make in 1 hour? And what can I make with basic tools and maybe just scrap that I would find laying around a shop? And I'll be honest, this isn't my favorite piece. I think it's ugly. I know the edge is not going to hold as well as it would if it was properly heat treated, but I'm still proud of the work that I did on it. I set out to make a knife in 1 hour and I did it. In fact, I did it with time to spare. So if you're sitting on the fence, you're thinking about getting into this, you're thinking about forging or knife making or some other type of DIY project, just go ahead and do it. And heck, if you make a video of it, let me know, and I will definitely come over there. I'll throw you a like and a comment, because I just love doing all of this stuff. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks for listening to me ramble. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, throw me a like. By all means, subscribe to my channel, and have a great day. We'll see you in the next video.